You will marry the Duke of Ravensmere before the month is out." Her father said it the way another man might remark on the weather. Flat, final, already turned to other business. Rosamond Aldecott stood very still in the middle of the morning room. A duke twice her age laid across her future like a stone across a road, and understood that the words had already been spoken elsewhere, in some panelled study over brandy and ink, and that she was hearing not a proposal, but a verdict. The July heat pressed against the tall windows. Somewhere below, in the little walled garden, a blackbird went on singing, as though nothing in the house had changed. Her fingers found the back of the chair beside her and held it, not for comfort, but the way a woman holds a rail on a listing deck. "Papa." Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I have not been introduced to the Duke of Ravensmere. You will be." Thursday. Lord Aldecott did not look up from the letters fanned across his writing table. The seal of the topmost one had been broken and pressed flat, and even from across the room she could see it was not the seal of any tradesman. "He dines here Thursday. You will wear the amber silk, and you will be civil, and you will not," he lifted one finger without lifting his eyes, "you will not treat him to that particular expression you keep for the curate. The curate is 59 and reads the lesson as though it bores him. The Duke, I am given to understand, is not so very far behind him in years." Now her father looked up. His face, which had once been handsome, and was still, at 50, arranged around the ruin of that handsomeness, held something she had not seen in it before. Not anger, which she knew in all its weathers, but a kind of exhausted appeal. It frightened her more than shouting would have. "Rosamond," he set the pen down. The small sound of it against the wood was very loud. "Sit." She did not sit. The blackbird sang on. "There is a paper," he said, "in the hands of Coutts's, with my name at the foot of it. There are 3 more like it. Do you understand what that means? Or must I be vulgar and say the sum aloud?" "I understand what it means." She had understood, in truth, for the better part of a year, in the dismissed footman, the sold greys, the way her mother's pearls had quietly ceased to appear at her mother's throat. "I did not know it had come to," she gestured, "once at the flattened seal, at the whole warm, bright, airless room, to this. It has come to a great deal worse than this, and His Grace of Ravensmere is the only door left that does not open onto the Marshalsea." Her father's hand, she saw, was not quite steady. He was a proud man. The unsteadiness cost him. "He has offered for you. He asks no settlement. None. Do you hear me? And he assumes my obligations entire. Your sisters will have their season. Your mother will keep her house. And you will be a duchess, which is more than this family had any business hoping for a 12-month since. And in exchange he has me." She heard the flatness in her own voice, and could not warm it. "A girl of 24, for a debt." "It is a very old arrangement, Papa. They used to do it with cattle." The blow did not fall. That was the worst of it, that her father only looked at her, and looked away, and drew one of the letters toward him with a hand that had begun, this last year, to show its bones. "You may hate me for it," he said. "Lo, I find I can bear that better than the other thing." She left him there, among his papers. In the corridor the long summer light lay across the boards in bars, warm through her slippers, and the house smelled of beeswax, and the lilies her mother would not give up, though the wax candles had gone to tallow in the servants' passages. Rosamond walked to the end of it, and stopped at the window that gave onto the square, and pressed her forehead to the glass, which was warm, and stood so until the warmth became unbearable, and she stepped back. Twice her age. She turned the phrase over, and found no soft edge to it anywhere. She had seen the Duke of Ravensmere precisely once, 3 seasons ago, across the width of a ballroom, a tall, dark, unsmiling figure, who had come late and gone early, and left a wake of whispers behind him that she had been too young then to decode. A widower, something about a first wife, a long time since, something about a son. A man who did not dance, and did not need to, because a dukedom danced for him. She had thought him, at 21, magnificent and cold, the way one thinks a cathedral in winter magnificent and cold. She had not once imagined standing at the altar of it. Behind her, a door opened, and her sister Georgiana came flying down the corridor in a froth of muslin, 16 and incapable of walking where she might run, and caught Rosamond's hands in both her own. "Is it true? Peggy had it from Mrs. Voss, who had it from Papa's own man. Is it true you're to be a duchess? Rosamond, a duchess, and you standing here like a wet Sunday? It is true. Then why are you not?" Oh, Georgiana's face, which hid nothing, went from delight to dawning dismay. "Oh, he is the old one. He is the one who pays," Rosamond said, and gentled it at once, because it was not Georgiana's fault, and Georgiana would have her season now, and dance every dance of it. "Never mind. Go and tell Mama I shall want the amber silk pressed for Thursday, and that I am very sensible of my good fortune." Georgiana went, but slower, some of the froth gone out of her, and Rosamond stood alone in the barred light, and made herself breathe. Thursday. She had until Thursday to decide what kind of woman she meant to be at the bottom of this, whether she would go to it weeping, which would change nothing, or go to it with her chin up and her eyes open, which would at least be hers. She chose, standing there, the second thing. It was the only part of the whole arrangement she was to be permitted to choose, and she took it. Thursday came in on a wave of heat that shimmered off the paving of the square and drove every window in the house wide. By 6 the drawing-room was a bell of warm air, thick with the scent of the lilies and the beeswax, and beneath it the green wet smell of the garden coming in through the open casements. Rosamond stood at the head of the stairs in the amber silk, a colour that made her fair skin gold and her dark hair darker, and listened to the wheels of a great carriage come to a stop below, and the double knock, and the low murmur of a voice at the door that she did not know, and would spend the rest of her life learning. His Grace the Duke of Ravensmere. She came down the stairs the way she had been taught to come downstairs before she could properly read, spine long, hand light on the rail, chin level, and if her heart was going like the blackbird's wings against her ribs, no one in the hall below could have known it. He was standing by the cold hearth when she entered, and he turned as she came in, and for one unguarded half-second she saw him see her. He was tall, taller than she had remembered, and broader through the shoulder than a man who did not dance had any right to be, so that the dark blue of his coat strained a little across his back when he moved. His hair was more grey than not, iron at the temples, swept back from a face that was all straight lines and shadow. A hard, handsome, weathered face with 2 deep brackets at the mouth that might once have been made by laughing, and had long since forgotten the habit. Not old, that was the thing she had not been prepared for. Older than she, a great deal older, 45 if he was a day, near enough twice her 24 to make the phrase true, but not old. There was nothing failing in him. He filled the doorway of his own presence entirely. His eyes, when they met hers, were a grey so dark it was nearly black, and they held on her a beat longer than courtesy strictly allowed before he inclined his head. "Miss Aldecott." His voice was low and unhurried, a voice accustomed to being waited for. It went through her like cool water on a burning day, and she resented it for that, and kept her face still. "Your Grace." She sank into the curtsy she had practiced, and rose out of it. "You are welcome to my father's house." "Am I?" It was not quite a question. The dark eyes moved over her once, not the way men's eyes moved over her at balls, she noted, cataloguing, pricing, but slower, and more searching, as though he were looking for something particular and was not certain he would find it. That is generously said. I confess I did not expect to be. Her father, hovering at the sideboard with the sherry, made a small strangled noise. Rosamond did not so much as glance at him. "I was raised to be civil to my guests, Your Grace, even the ones who have bought me." The room went absolutely silent. Even the blackbird, she fancied, stopped. Her father set down the decanter with a crack of glass on silver, and her mother's fan ceased its fluttering, and somewhere a footman's breath caught audibly. The Duke of Ravensmere looked at her, and then, slowly, at the corner of that hard mouth, in the deep bracket where laughing had once lived, something moved. Not a smile. She would not have granted it that. But a flicker, quick as a fish turning in dark water, gone before she could be sure of it. "No," he said. "I have not bought you, Miss Aldecott. I have bought a very great quantity of your father's paper, which is a different and considerably less romantic transaction. You I have merely," he paused, and she had the strange sense that he was choosing the word with care, as a man chooses his footing on ice, asked for. "You are entirely at liberty to refuse me." "Am I?" "Ravensmere," her father began. "You are." The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to, and she understood, watching him, that he had perhaps never in his life needed to. "I will settle your father's affairs on Monday, whether you have me or not. That is done. It wants only my signature, and it is already, in every way that matters, given." He turned the stem of his untouched glass once between long fingers. "I would not have a wife who came to me under the impression that she had been sold to keep her sisters out of the rain. It is a poor foundation. I have built on it before." The last 4 words were quiet enough that she thought perhaps she alone had caught them. They landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed there. "Then why," she said, "ask at all? You have my father's debts. You want nothing he can give. A man in your position might have any bride in England with a snap of his fingers, and a younger one than I, and a sillier one, who would thank Providence on her knees for you. Why come to a bankrupt baron's drawing room in this heat to ask a girl who has just insulted you across her mother's carpet?" For a long moment he did not answer. The summer light was going gold and long across the floor between them. Out in the garden the blackbird had begun again, and the sound of it came in through the open windows on the smell of warm box hedge and turned earth. "Because," said the Duke of Ravensmere at last, "you looked at me across a ballroom 3 years ago as though you saw a man and not a coronet. You will not remember it. There is no reason you should. But I have found, in a good many years of being looked at, that it is a rarer thing than you would suppose, and I am too old now to want the other kind." He set the glass down, untouched, on the mantel. "That is my whole reason, and it is not a flattering one to either of us, so we need not speak of it again. Miss Aldecott, will you walk in the garden with me while your excellent father recovers his composure? I find I have said everything I came to say in the wrong order." She should have said no. Every ordered thing in her, the pride that had chosen, on Monday, to go to this with her chin up, told her to say no, to make him work, to give him nothing. She said yes, and hated how much she wanted to. The garden by 7 was all long shadow and slanting light, the box hedges giving up their sharp green scent to the cooling air, the gravel of the little path still warm through the soles of her slippers. He walked with his hands clasped behind his back, and his head bent, a full pace apart from her, scrupulous. And for a while neither of them spoke, and the silence was not comfortable, but it was not, she found, unbearable either. "I have a son," he said abruptly, as though the words had been waiting. "You will hear of it, so you had better hear it from me. He is 21. He is at present of the settled opinion that I am marrying to spite him, and he will not be gracious to you, and I will not ask you to bear it in silence, because I have watched 3 minutes of you being unable to bear anything in silence, and I find I would not have it otherwise." The bracket at his mouth moved again. "His name is Anthony. He is a great deal like his mother, and I loved his mother, and he does not believe that either, which is the whole grief of it." "You loved her?" She said it before she could weigh whether she ought. "Very much." He stopped by the sundial at the garden's heart, where the last of the light caught the brass and threw a long blade of shadow across the numerals. His hand went out and rested flat on the warm metal, and she watched his thumb move once across the engraved rim, as though it were a habit older than thought. She has been gone 11 years. I did not intend to marry again. I intend a great many things I do not do. He looked up, and the dark eyes found hers, and there was something in them so direct and so unshielded that she felt the breath go out of her. I will be honest with you. Since I have begun so badly, there is nothing left to lose by it. I do not expect you to love me, Miss Aldecott. I am aware of the arithmetic. But I will not lie to you, and I will not touch what you do not offer. And I will stand between you and the whole world if it comes to that, which, with my son and my sisters, and every dowager in London who has spent this fortnight sharpening her tongue on my name, it very likely will. That is what I have to offer. It is not romance. It is only every last thing I have. The blackbird sang. The brass cooled under his hand. Somewhere in the house behind them, her father was pouring himself the sherry no one else had touched, and her sisters were leaning out of an upper window they thought she could not see, and the whole desperate machinery of the family turned on the single point of her answer. Rosamond looked at this man, this grave, weathered, unlooked-for man twice her age, who had crossed a hot city to tell her the truth in the wrong order, and felt, for the first time since her father had spoken the verdict over his letters, something other than the cold arithmetic of it. She could not have named the feeling. It was not love, she was not a fool, and it was not love, but it was not nothing, and she had expected nothing, and the difference undid her. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was not quite steady now, and she let it not be. "If I am to spend the remainder of my life as your wife, I should like you to stop calling me Miss Aldecott." It has begun to sound like a sentence being read. Something crossed his face, surprise, and after it, slower, a thing she would not until much later learn to recognize as hope. "Rosamond," he said, trying it low, as though it were a word in a language he had not spoken in a long while. "It does not suit a sentence. It is far too—" He stopped, and she saw him decide not to finish it, and wanted, absurdly, fiercely, to know how it ended. "Thank you," he said instead. "I am Julian. You need not use it yet. But it is there, when you want it." They stood a moment longer by the sundial, in the failing gold light, a proper pace apart, not touching, while the shadow of the Norman crept across the hour, and Rosamond understood, quite clearly, quite calmly, standing in her mother's garden, with the box hedge sharp in her nose and the warm gravel underfoot, that there would be no going back from this now. The bans would be read. The paper would be signed. On Monday her father's ruin would be lifted like a fog, and by the month's end she would be the Duchess of Ravensmere, wife to a man she had met an hour ago and did not love, and could not, she was beginning to fear, entirely dislike. She had not expected that last part. It was the part that frightened her. "Thursday next," said the Duke, said Julian, as he handed her back over the threshold into the candlelight, his fingers warm and brief and entirely correct on hers. "My son dines with us. I will not pretend it will be pleasant, but I would rather you meet the worst of it early, with me beside you, than come upon it alone in some drawing room where I cannot reach you." "I am not afraid of a boy of 21, Rosamond said. "No," he agreed, and there was the flicker again, quick and dark and gone, at the corner of his mouth. "I did not think you would be. That is rather what I am counting on." He bowed over her hand and was gone into the summer dusk, and the great carriage pulled away, and Rosamond stood in the hall among the guttering candles, with the print of his fingers still warm on her own, and the whole altered shape of her life settling around her like dust after a fall, and thought, with a clarity that would not let her sleep that night, that the danger had never been the man twice her age who did not love her. The danger was going to be how very much she wanted him to. She did not sleep, and the morning came in hot and white over the square, and with it came the calling cards. They arrived on the silver tray before the tea had steeped, a small avalanche of them, cream and stiff, and edged in the particular ivory of people who had not troubled to leave a card at the Aldecott house since the year the greys were sold. Rosamond turned them over one by one at the breakfast table, while her mother pretended to read the Morning Chronicle upside down, and Georgiana bounced in her chair. The Countess of Hervelle, Rosamond read aloud, who cut Mama on Bond Street in April, and looked through her as though she were glass. She did not, said her mother faintly. She did, Mama. I was carrying your parcels. Rosamond set the card down and picked up the next. Mrs. Dauncey, Lady Otley. The Mrs. Pruitt, who once told Georgie her gloves were provincial. The paper made a small dry whisper as it fell back to the tray. How a broken seal at Coots's and a coronet on Thursday have improved the quality of our acquaintance. Yesterday we were bankrupts. Today we are relations of a duke, and all of London has remembered where we live. Rosamond, her mother's voice held a warning and, under it, a wobble that undid the warning entirely. You will receive them. You will be gracious. Whatever this marriage costs you, child, it buys your sisters this. She gestured at the heaped tray, at the sudden shining fact of being wanted, and you will not spend it carelessly out of pride. That landed. Rosamond set down her cup. Across the table, Georgiana had gone quiet, watching, 16 and old enough now to understand exactly what the cards meant, and exactly what they had been bought with. No, Mama, she said, gentler. I will not. The first of the callers came at 11, and the second at past, and by 1 o'clock Rosamond had smiled until the muscles of her face ached and poured out tea until the pot ran cold twice over, and had learned, from a dozen mouths dressed up as congratulation, precisely how the ton meant to talk about her. A brave girl. Such a sacrifice, and born so prettily. Poor Ravensmere, a widower these 11 years. And now this, at his age. One did admire a girl who knew her duty. The words came wrapped in lavender water and false warmth, and each one had a small blade folded inside it. And Rosamond took them all, and thanked the givers, and offered more cake. It was nearly 2 when the footman announced the last of them, and the name changed the temperature of the room. Lady Sybil Marchbank. Her mother's fan stopped. Georgiana, at the window, turned round. The woman who came in was beautiful the way a January morning is beautiful, clear and cold, and entirely without mercy. She was perhaps 35, tall, with pale gold hair dressed close under a bonnet of deep violet silk, and a face of such fine, still symmetry that it took Rosamond a moment to see there was nothing warm moving behind it at all. She crossed the carpet without hurry, and her scent came with her, something dark and expensive, iris and cold smoke that swallowed the lilies whole. Miss Aldecott. She did not curtsy so much as incline, a bare half-inch. I will not keep you. I see you are much engaged. Her pale eyes travelled the emptied cake plates, the crowd of cards, and returned to Rosamond's face with a small, precise contempt. How they do come running, once there is a duke in it. They do, Lady Sybil. You are the 14th today. Rosamond kept her voice even and warm. May I offer you tea? The pot is fresh. You may not. The woman drew off one violet glove, finger by finger, and did not sit. I am Julian's sister. His late wife's sister, I should say. Eleanor was my sister. Julian is only my brother by the misfortune of the wedding. I have kept his house 11 years, and raised his son the seasons he could not be troubled to, and I have come to look at the girl he means to put in Eleanor's place. The glove came free. So, let me look at you. The room had gone very still. Out in the square a cart rolled by, iron rims loud on the hot stone, and faded. Rosamond stood, and let herself be looked at, and looked back. You are younger than I feared, Lady Sybil said at last, and handsomer, which is worse. I had hoped for something plain and grateful. She drew the glove through her fingers, slow, like a woman testing the edge of something. Understand me, Miss Aldecott, since no one else in this perfumed little room will trouble to tell you the truth. My brother does not marry for love. He is not capable of it. He spent whatever he had of it long ago, and Eleanor died of the want, though the physicians called it a fever. Her mouth curved, exquisite and bloodless. He marries for use. Eleanor was a great heiress. You are a great convenience. He needs a hostess he can command, and a duchess who will owe him everything and ask him for nothing, and a girl swept out of a debtor's shadow is a girl who will never dare raise her voice in his house. That is what you are, not a bride. A well-chosen servant with a ring. Lady Sybil, her mother began, half rising. No, Mamma. Rosamond did not take her eyes from the pale, still face. Let her finish. She has clearly rehearsed it in the carriage, and it would be a pity to waste. Something flickered in the cold eyes, surprise, and after it a sharpening, as though a duller opponent had unexpectedly shown a blade. You have spirit, Lady Sybil said softly. For now. Eleanor had spirit too, when she came to us. Ask my nephew what became of it. Ask Anthony, when you meet him, what his father's house does to a woman who marries into it warm. She drew the glove back on, unhurried, and every eye in the room followed the slow violet fingers. I came to see whether you were a schemer or a lamb. I find you are neither, quite, which is inconvenient of you. Good day, Miss Aldecott. Do enjoy the cards while they last. They have a way of ceasing, in that house. And she was gone, in a wake of iris and cold smoke, before Rosamond could summon a single one of the dozen replies rising scalding to her tongue. The room let out its breath. Georgiana came away from the window, white about the mouth. Rosamond. She was Rosamond. Is any of it true? I don't know, Rosamond said, and found she meant it, and hated that she meant it. She looked down at the little violet-scented emptiness the woman had left in the middle of the warm room, at the cake plates and the shining useless cards, and thought of a man's hand flat on the warm brass of a sundial, and his voice saying, I have built on it before, and could not, for the life of her, make the two pictures hold still together. The banns were read that Sunday, in the great cool nave of St. George's, with the summer light falling in long coloured bars through the south windows, and Rosamond stood between her mother and Georgiana, and heard her own name spoken into the incense and stone hush, and joined to his, Julian Alexander Vane, Duke of Ravensmere, and felt the whole congregation turn its collective attention on the back of her neck like a warm, damp hand. She did not turn round. She kept her eyes on the curate, who read the banns as he read everything, as though it bored him, and thought that at least in that one small thing the world was steady. Julian was not there. He had sent, the day before, a note in a hand she was already learning, black, upright, economical, no flourish anywhere in it, that said only, I will not stand beside you to be stared at until I have the right to stand between you and the starers. Sunday, you will be looked at a great deal. I am sorry for it. Thursday, you dine at Ravensmere House, and meet my son. Come at 7. Do not, whatever you do, wear the amber. My sister-in-law will be there, and she has a horror of any colour warmer than a bruise, and I find I want you to unsettle her. J. She had read it 4 times, and then, ridiculously, a 5th, and then folded it very small and put it in the workbox where her grandmother's thimble lived, and had told herself it was because one kept such things, a duke's letters, for the sisters, for the family archive, and had known even as she thought it that this was a lie of the sort she was going to have to watch in herself very closely. From now on. She did not wear the amber. She wore a gown of deep peacock blue that her mother wept over the expense of, and that made her look, Georgiana said, like the inside of a kingfisher's wing, and she went to Ravensmere House on the Thursday, in the long gold light of a summer evening, with her chin level and her heart going like a struck bell. The house was vast, and cool, and hushed, a great pale stone weight of a house set back behind railings off the park, and inside it smelled of beeswax and old roses, and, faint underneath, of the particular dry mineral coolness of very large rooms that the sun does not reach. A butler with a face like a closed door took her up a staircase wide enough to drive a curricle on, and the portraits watched her go. Veins and more veins, dark-eyed, unsmiling, 3 centuries of them. And by the time the doors of the drawing room opened, she had counted 41 of them, and used every one to steady her breath. Julian came across the room to her at once. That surprised her, that he did not wait to be approached, as a duke in his own house might, but crossed the whole width of the orbison to reach her, and took her hand, and looked down at her with something in the dark eyes that eased, minutely, at the sight of her. "You did not wear the amber," he said low, "for her alone. You asked me not to. I did. I was not certain you would oblige me. It is early days for obliging." The bracket moved at his mouth. "Kingfisher blue. My sister-in-law will loathe it. You look." He stopped, in that way he had, on the edge of the word, and set it down unspoken. "Come, let me present my son before the loathing begins in earnest." Anthony Vane stood by the tall windows with his back half to the room, and he did not turn until his father spoke his name. And when he did turn, Rosamond understood at once, and with a small cold drop of the heart, that Lady Sybil had done her work here long and thoroughly. He was 21 and beautiful in the way his father must once have been, before the years and the grief had cut the brackets round the mouth. The same dark eyes, the same straight lines of the face, but all of it still soft with youth, and just now hard with a dislike he had not troubled to hide. He wore his coat with a careless, expensive elegance, and he held a glass he had not drunk from, and he looked at Rosamond from her slippers to her hair with an insolence so precise it could only have been learned. "So," he said, "the bride." He did not bow. "You are younger than the last on dit had it." They said 30 and desperate. "You are what, 20? 24, Misty. Vain." Rosamond sank a curtsy exactly as deep as courtesy required, and not a hair deeper. "And you are 21, and cross, and I find I do not blame you in the least. So we may perhaps dispense with the fencing, and go straight to dinner." A silence. Behind her she heard Julian go very still. Anthony's dark brows climbed. "Straight to dinner," he repeated. "How practical. My father does admire a practical woman." He set his untouched glass down on the sill with a small click. "He married a practical woman once before, did you know?" "Oh, not my mother. My mother he married for her £40,000, and my mother, having handed over the 40,000, was permitted to fade quietly out of his notice over 11 years, until she, the word caught, and he mastered it, and Rosamond saw exactly how much it cost him, and exactly how young he was under the cruelty, until she left us. Fever, they said. My aunt says otherwise. My aunt says she died of being unwanted in a great cold house, and I have never yet heard my father trouble to contradict her. Anthony, Julian's voice, from just behind her shoulder, was quiet. It was so quiet that the quietness was worse than any shout could have been, and Rosamond felt the whole room flinch from it. "That is enough." "Is it?" The boy's chin came up, and now there was a bright wetness at the rim of his eyes that he was furious to feel there. "It is never enough, sir. That is rather the trouble. You buy a girl out of a sponging house, and you dress her in blue, and you bring her here to sit in my mother's chair. And I am to smile and pass the salt and say nothing, because saying nothing is the great accomplishment of this family. You will not," said Julian, "speak of your mother to distress a guest in this house. She is not a guest. She is the replacement." Anthony's voice cracked clean across the middle. "And I will speak of my mother wherever and whenever I choose, because I appear to be the only person left in England who remembers she existed. That is not true." The words were out of Rosamond's mouth before she had decided to say them, and both men turned to her, and she felt the ground she stood on, and knew it was thin, and spoke anyway. "It is not true, Mistress Vane, and I think in your heart you know it is not. And I think that is the whole of what is the matter with you." She kept her voice level and low, the voice she had learned across a year of bailiffs at the door. "You are the only person who speaks of her, yes, but you are not the only person who remembers. I have been in this house half an hour, and I have watched your father." She turned her head deliberately and looked at Julian, and Julian looked back at her with an expression gone suddenly and terribly unguarded. There is a portrait on the stair, Mr. Vane, the 14th from the bottom, of a fair woman in grey with a book in her lap, and your eyes exactly. Every other portrait in this house has an inch of dust along the top of the frame. That one has none. Someone sees that it is kept. Someone stops on the stair. I should not think it is the housemaid. The room had gone entirely silent. Anthony was staring at her, the anger arrested on his face, and behind it something young and stricken beginning to show through the cracks. "You are guessing," he said, but the certainty had gone out of it. "I am observing. It is what I do instead of weeping, I recommend it." She let a breath out, slow. "I am not here to sit in your mother's chair. I would not, if you showed me which it was, and I will ask the servants tomorrow, so that I never do. I am here because my family was going under, and your father threw a rope, and I took it, and I am not ashamed of that, and I will not pretend to a grief for a woman I never met, but I will not sit at this table and let you tell me your father did not love her, because I have watched him for half an hour, and whatever else is wrong in this cold, beautiful house, that particular thing is a—" She stopped and chose the plain word, "a lie. And I think someone has been feeding it to you for 11 years because it suits them that you and your father never speak." She did not look at the doorway. She did not need to. She had caught, at the edge of her eye, the flare of violet silk that had been standing in it for she did not know how long. "How perceptive," said Lady Sybil Marchbank, coming into the room on her cloud of iris and cold smoke, drawing off her gloves finger by finger, as she had done in the Aldecott drawing-room, unhurried. "Deadly. The bargain bride has a tongue after all. And a theory. How charming for us all." Her pale eyes went past Rosamond to Anthony, and Rosamond watched the boy's face change under that gaze. Watched him go, in an instant, from a young man on the edge of hearing something true to a child, reaching for the only certainty he had been given. "Anthony, dearest, has she been unkind to you? She has the look of a girl who is clever with the defenseless." "She has not been unkind," Anthony said, low, confused, and Rosamond could have wept for the crack in it. "She said, Aunt, she said my father, that he did keep my mother's portrait." "Did she?" Lady Sybil's smile did not touch her eyes. How well she reads a house she entered 30 minutes ago. One almost admires the speed of the calculation. She turned the full pale weight of her attention on Rosamond, and her voice dropped to something silken, and only for the two of them, though the whole room strained to hear it. "You are cleverer than I hoped, and stupider than you know, Miss Aldecott. You have been in my family half an hour, and already you are picking at the one seam I have spent 11 years sewing shut. I would leave it, if I were you. Some houses keep their shape only because no one pulls the thread. And some," said Rosamond, "keep it because someone stands in the doorway making certain the thread stays pulled. I have not decided yet which yours is, Lady Sybil. But I find I am very interested to learn." For one heartbeat the beautiful cold face showed her something real underneath, a flash of something that was not contempt at all, but very close to fear. And then it was gone, smoothed over, and Lady Sybil laughed, light and social, and the danger folded itself away. "Julian," she said, turning to him, gracious, "your little Baroness is a wit. You will be so diverted. Shall we go in? I am famished, and Anthony has not eaten a thing all day. Poor lamb, he has been in such a state over all this." She held out her hand to her nephew, and the boy took it, after a fractured second's hesitation, and let himself be led toward the doors. But he looked back once, at Rosamond, over his shoulder, with an expression she could not read except that it was no longer, entirely, hatred. Julian offered Rosamond his arm. She took it, and felt the tension standing in it like a wire drawn tight, and understood that the half hour had cost him something she could not yet see the shape of. "You should not have engaged her," he said under his breath as they crossed the hall behind the others. the candles throwing their two shadows long and joined up the pale walls. You do not know what she is. Then tell me what she is. I cannot. Not tonight. Not here. Not with him listening at every door. His hand came over hers where it lay on his sleeve, brief, warm, and closed once, hard, before it let go. Only, Rosamond, what you said. About the portrait. He did not look at her. A muscle stood out along his jaw. How did you know it was kept? I told you. I observed. No one observes that. His voice had gone rough at the edges, the unhurried control of it worn suddenly thin. No one has ever once observed that. I have kept it 11 years, and told no living soul, and I did not think. He stopped, at the very doors of the dining room, with the light and the murmur of the others spilling out toward them, and for one moment the great grave weathered man twice her age looked down at her, with something on his face so raw and so unlooked for that she felt it go through her, like the cold water of his voice on that first burning day. You have been in my house 30 minutes, he said, very low, and you have seen more of it than my son has in 21 years. I do not know whether that is the best thing that has happened to me in a decade or the most dangerous. I suspect it is both. Your Grace flatters himself, Rosamond said, because her own heart was going too hard, and she did not trust what her voice would do if she let it be soft. I have merely a good eye and no patience. It is not a mystical gift. Half of London calls it ill-breeding. The bracket moved at his mouth, that quick dark flicker, gone before she could hold it. Half of London, he murmured, has never once told me the truth across my own hall. I begin to think ill-breeding much undervalued. And then the doors were full open, and the footmen were bowing, and there was no more to be said, and they went in to dinner behind his sister-in-law and his son, into a long cold candle-lit room under the eyes of 3 centuries of unsmiling veins, to eat and be civil, and pretend that nothing at all had cracked open between the 4 of them in the drawing-room half an hour before. It was a terrible meal. Lady Sybil was brilliant at it, charming, attentive, filling every silence with just the right light nothing. Deferring to Julian with an exquisite mockery, only Rosamond seemed to catch, drawing Anthony out with soft questions that kept him always turned away from his father and toward her. Julian said little. He watched his son the length of the table with a hunger he did not know showed, and every time he opened his mouth to bridge the distance, his sister-in-law was there first, silken, sliding a remark into the gap so smoothly that the moment closed before it had properly opened, and the boy never saw it done. Rosamond saw it done 6 times before the fish was cleared. By the 7th she had stopped counting, and started, very quietly, to be afraid. It was between the removes, in a lull while the footman changed the plates, that Lady Sybil turned her pale eyes down the table and laid the last card of the evening on the cloth, gentle as a caress. Of course, she said, to no one, to the room, the wedding cannot be at St. George's, after all. I had a note this morning from the Dowager Duchess of Coombe, Julian's own aunt, you understand, the head of the family since his mother went, and she will not attend. She has said so, quite openly, to a great many people. She calls the match a scandal, and the bride an adventuress, and she has begun to say, my dears, that she means to write to the Archbishop himself about the irregularity of a man of Julian's years, and standing taking a portionless girl 3 weeks after buying up her father's ruin. She smiled, and lifted her glass, and the candlelight ran red through it. I only mention it, Julian, so that dear Rosamond is not taken by surprise. It would be cruel to let her walk into a half-empty church. The whole of the family will follow the Dowager's lead. They always do. And if your aunt cuts the marriage, then the marriage is cut, and no rope you throw a baron will change it. I should so hate, she said, setting the glass down untouched, exactly as her brother-in-law had set his down untouched in the Aldecott drawing-room a week before, for the child to be humiliated on her wedding day. One does grow fond. And into the silence that followed, the long, cold candle-lit silence, with Anthony's stricken face turned down toward his plate, and Julian's hand gone white-knuckled round the stem of his glass, and 3 centuries of veins looking down from the dark walls, Rosamond understood that the ground had shifted again under her feet. That this was no longer only a debt and a coronet and a man twice her age she was frightened of wanting, but something with a will behind it that meant her real harm, and that whatever thread Lady Sybil had spent 11 years sewing shut, she, Rosamond, had 30 minutes ago put her hand to it in front of witnesses, and there would be no unpicking that now. She set down her own glass, very steadily, and did not weep, and looked down the length of the cold, bright table at the beautiful, smiling woman who had just promised, in the softest possible voice, to see her ruined before she reached the altar, and began, for the first time since her father had spoken the verdict over his letters, to think not about how she would endure this, but about how she meant to win. The morning came up hot and still, the square shimmering by 9, and the paving already giving back the heat it had drunk overnight, when the footman brought word to the breakfast room that a gentleman was below and would give no card. No card, her mother repeated, setting down her chocolate. At this hour, Rosamond, it will be a tradesman come round to the wrong door. Send Peggy, it is not a tradesman, Mama. Rosamond had already risen. She did not know how she knew. She only knew that her skin had gone cold across the back of the neck in the warm, bright room, and that there was one person in London graceless enough to arrive before 10, and proud enough to give no name. I will see him in the small parlour. Alone, Anthony Vane stood by the cold grate, with his hat still in his hands, turning it round and round by the brim. And when she came in, he looked up at her with a face that had not slept, the dark, vain eyes bruised underneath, the careless elegance of Thursday gone, replaced by something raw and young and mulish that reminded her, sharply, of Georgiana caught in a lie she was too proud to confess. Mr. Vane. She closed the door. You are abroad early. I could not. He stopped. His jaw worked. The hat went round again. The 14th from the bottom, he said, in a rush, not looking at her. I counted them. Last night. After you had gone, and my aunt had gone to bed. I took a candle up the stair, and I counted the frames, and every one of them had an inch of grey along the top, exactly as you said. Every single one. 3 centuries of us furred over like the tops of old bottles, and then the 14th. And the 14th? Clean. The word came out cracked. He set the hat down on the mantel hard, as though it had offended him. Not a speck. The wood polished, so the grain shows dark. And there was. His hand lifted, helpless, and dropped. There was a sprig of something on the sill beneath it. Dried. Lavender, I think. Old, as though it had been changed and changed again for years and the last one left too long. Rosamond said nothing. She had learned, across a year of bailiffs, that silence pulled the truth up out of people faster than any question, and that the young could not bear it at all. He never told me. Anthony said. 11 years. He never once said, look, I keep her. I stop here. My aunt told me, my aunt has always told me, that he could not so much as speak my mother's name, that the sight of her likeness distressed him, and he had it hung on the back stair where he need never pass it. His voice climbed. But it is not on the back stair, it is on the great stair, where he goes up to his own chamber every night of his life. He must pass it every night. He must have passed it 1,000 nights, and stopped, and he turned his face away to the window and stood breathing. Miss Vane, Rosamond said gently. Why have you come to me? Because you saw it in half an hour. He rounded on her, and now the anger was back, but it had turned inward, and there was a wet brightness at the rims of his eyes he was furious to own. You, a stranger, forgive me, a bought bride, in from the street, and you read my father like an open book. And I have lived in that house 21 years, and been told what to see in it every day of them. So I am asking you. His chin came up. Who lied to me? You last night, across the soup, or my aunt, every day since I was 10 years old? The clock on the mantel ticked into the quiet. Below in the square a water cart went by, iron and slosh, the driver calling to his horse, and the ordinary hot morning went on outside the shut door. "I cannot answer that for you," Rosamond said. "I have known your aunt 1 week and your father a fortnight, and I will not pretend to certainties I have not earned. But I will tell you what I have seen, and you may weigh it, because you seem to me a young man who has been given a great many conclusions and very few facts." She crossed to him, slow, and stopped an arm's length off. "Your aunt watched your father, all through that dinner, the way a keeper watches a gate. Every time he opened his mouth toward you, she was there before him. 6 times, Mr. Vane, I counted those too. It is what I do instead of weeping. I believe I mentioned it." A sound came out of him that was half a laugh and half something worse. "She showed me letters," he said, very low, and Rosamond felt the whole shape of the room change around the words. "When I was a boy. My mother's letters, her own hand, full of unhappiness, full of being cold in that house, being unwanted. My father away and away and away. My aunt kept them in a rosewood box, and she would read me one, sometimes when I was low, so I should know," she said. "So I should know the truth of what he was, and not be taken in by his silences." His hands had begun to shake. He pressed them flat to his thighs. "Are you going to tell me the letters were false?" "No." Rosamond held his eyes. "I have not seen them. I would never call a woman's own hand false without seeing it. But I will ask you one thing, and I want you to answer it honestly, because I think no one has asked it of you in 11 years. She drew a breath. "When your aunt read you those letters, did she read you the whole of each one? Or did she read you a part, and fold the rest away, and put the box back on its shelf?" Anthony Vane went perfectly white, and then he made no answer at all, which was answer enough, and Rosamond understood that she had put her hand, for the second time, precisely on the thread, and that this time the boy had felt it move. He left soon after, more shaken than he had come, and would not take her hand at the door, but he paused on the step with the white light hard on his young face, and said, "Without turning, you will find she does not lose gracefully, my aunt. I have watched her not lose gracefully my whole life. Have a care, Miss Aldecott." And then he was gone down into the glare of the square, and Rosamond stood in the cool of the hall with her heart going hard, and thought, a rosewood box. A part read, and the rest folded away. She had the shape of it now. She wanted the whole. Julian came himself that afternoon, unannounced, which was not a thing Dukes did, and found her in the little walled garden where the blackbird lived, cutting the last of the sweet William in the heavy gold heat, with a basket over her arm, because her hands had needed something to do since Anthony left. He came out through the low door in his shirt sleeves, and his dark coat over his arm, having plainly walked, and stood a moment in the sharp green shade of the box hedge, watching her before she knew he was there. "Your Grace," she straightened, the shears loose in her hand. "You walked. In this. I find I think better on my feet, and I had a great deal to think." He hung the coat over the sundial's arm, her father's sundial, a poor cousin to the great brass one at Ravensmere, and the sun struck the grey at his temples and the sweat at his collar, and made him, for a moment, only a tired man in a hot garden, and not a coronet at all. "My son called on you this morning." "He did. How do you know it?" "Because he came home and shut himself in the library and would not come out, and then at noon he asked me." Julian stopped. Something moved behind the dark eyes, held hard in check. "He asked me whether I remembered the color of his mother's eyes. It is the first question he has put to me. That was not an accusation. In 3 years. His voice was steady, and it cost him to keep it so. She could hear the cost, like a wire under a smooth cloth. I do not know what you said to him, Rosamond. I am not certain I want to know. But I have not, in a very long time, I have not had cause to thank anyone. And I find I am out of the habit and doing it badly. So, thank you." The blackbird sang. She set the shears in the basket to have somewhere to put her hands. "Sit," she said. "You look wretched, and there is shade by the wall, and I will not have a duke fall down in my mother's sweet William. Think of the talk. The bracket moved at his mouth. You are the only person in England who orders me to sit. Someone must. You are plainly no good at deciding it for yourself. She waited until he had folded himself down onto the low stone bench in the shade, and then she sat too, a decorous foot off, and for a moment neither spoke, and the heat pressed close and green around them, and the box gave up its cat's fur smell to the still air. Tell me about your sister-in-law, she said. The ease went out of him at once, as a tide goes out, leaving something cold and flat behind. No, Julian, you used it. He turned his head and looked at her, and there was surprise in it, and under the surprise the thing she had seen at the dining room doors, raw and unguarded. My name. You said you need not, until you wanted it. I want a great many things I ought not, Rosamond said, before she could stop the words, and felt the heat climb her throat, and pressed on past it because retreat would only make it worse. You are trying to change the subject, Your Grace, and you are a poor hand at that too. Tell me what she is. I have a boy weeping over a rosewood box of half-read letters, and a dowager duchess threatening the archbishop, and a wedding in 12 days, and I will not go into that cold house blind. If you will not stand beside me to be stared at least give me a map of the room. For a long moment he looked at the wall, at the espaliered pear going leaf-heavy along the warm brick, and she watched him weigh something, and set it down, and pick it up again. Sybil keeps her place in that house, he said at last, slow, by a thing I gave into her keeping 11 years ago, when I was half out of my senses with grief, and she was the only creature standing who could manage a household and a child, and a duke who could not manage himself. I gave her power over things I ought never to have surrendered, and she has held it since, and used it, and turned my son against me one folded letter at a time, and I have let her, because to take it back I must. His jaw set. The muscle stood out along it. There is a cost, Rosamond, to the taking back, a cost to Anthony that I have not been willing to make him pay. That is all I can tell you. It is not that I do not trust you. It is that the thing is not mine alone to tell, and the other person it belongs to is 21, and has just, this noon, asked me the color of his mother's eyes. She heard the shape of the wall in it, and did not push against the wall, because she had pushed against walls all her life, and knew which ones would not move. But one thing she would have. Then tell me only this, she said, your aunt of Coombe. The dowager. Lady Sybil laid it on the cloth last night like a wager, that your aunt will cut the marriage, and the family will follow. Is it true, or was it theatre? It is true enough. He rubbed a hand over his face. My aunt is 74, and has ruled this family since my mother went, and she does not care for the match, and Sybil has been 3 weeks pouring poison in her ear by every post. But hear me. He turned, and caught her hand, there in the green shade, his fingers warm and hard and entirely improper around hers, and did not seem to know he had done it. Do not go to her. Whatever you are thinking, and I can see that you are thinking it, do not go to my aunt of Coombe. She is not cruel, but she is old and proud, and Sybil has got to her first, and she will offer you a way out that is dressed as kindness, and is in truth a trap, and you will not see the teeth of it until it has closed. Promise me you will not go. I never promise a thing before I have heard it, Rosamond said, and drew her hand back, gently, before the warmth of his could unmake her resolve, and you would not respect me if I did. But I have heard you, Julian. I will remember that you said it. It was not a promise, and he knew it was not, and he looked at her a long moment in the golden green with something that was half exasperation, and half, she would not name the other half. She had not the courage for it, in the heat of a summer afternoon, with the print of his hand still warm on hers. Then he rose, and took up his coat from the sundial, and bowed over the basket of sweet William, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for a duke to bow at a girl cutting flowers. 12 days, he said. God help us both. The house of the Dowager Duchess of Coombe stood in Berkeley Square, behind railings as black and cold as the woman herself was reputed to be, and Rosamond went to it 2 mornings later, in her plainest walking dress and her mother's second-best bonnet, alone, in a hired chair, having told the household she was gone to the circulating library, the first outright lie she had told her mother in her 24 years, and it sat in her like a swallowed stone the whole way there. She had not sent up her name in advance. She trusted to surprise, and to the ton's own greed for spectacle. And she was right, the dowager, hearing that the Aldecott girl herself stood in the hall, could no more have refused to receive her than refused to breathe. The morning room was shut against the heat, blinds half drawn, the air inside cool and dim and smelling of dry rose leaves and snuff, and, under it, the particular still cold of a house where fires are lit for ceremony and never for warmth. The dowager sat bolt upright, in a hard chair by the empty grate, a small woman gone to bone and will, her white hair dressed high and old-fashioned, a stick of ebony under one claw of a hand, and the vain eyes, those same dark eyes, ancient now and terribly clever, fixed on Rosamond from the doorway on. "So," she said. Her voice was thin and dry as the rose leaves. "The adventuress calls in person. That is bold. I had expected a letter, and tears in it. Sit down, girl, where I can see you, and do not touch the cakes. They are for show, and they are stale, and I dislike to watch the young pretend." Rosamond sat, spine straight, hands folded, and did not touch the cakes. "You know why I have come, Your Grace. I know why every portionless chit in London has ever crossed my threshold. You have come to plead." The old woman's mouth folded. "You have come to tell me you love him. No, I see by your face you are not fool enough for that one. Good. You have come to tell me you will make him a good and dutiful wife, that your family's misfortune is no crime, that you never sought the match, that you will bring no shame on the name. Have I the substance of it? You may keep the speech. I have heard it 30 years. I had no speech prepared." Rosamond said, "I came to ask you a question, and to answer any you cared to put me honestly, and then to go. I have not your years, Your Grace, and I will not waste them." Something shifted in the ancient eyes, a flicker of the same surprise she had seen in Sybil, in Anthony, the surprise of the practiced swordsman meeting an unexpected guard. "Have you?" The stick tapped once against the floor. "Then ask, why do you oppose the marriage? Not what you have said in drawing rooms. I know what you have said. The truth. What is it you are protecting, that a duke's second marriage threatens?" The dowager looked at her a long time in the dim cool room, and the little gilt clock ticked, and somewhere deep in the house a door closed. "You are cleverer than the reports," she said at last, "which is a pity, because it will make what I am about to do to you feel unkind, and I had rather it did not. I bear you no malice, child, understand that. What I do for the name, which will outlast every soul in this room, and has a claim on all of us that the young never credit until they are old." She reached, without looking, to a small table at her elbow, and took up a folded paper, and held it out across the cold hearth. "You believe he wants nothing of you. He has told you so, I make no doubt, in that grave voice that makes women forget their sums. He told you he asks no settlement, that he assumes your father's obligations and requires nothing in return but yourself." The paper trembled very slightly in the old hand. "Read it. Go on. I had it from a source within his own household not 3 days since, and I have had my man of business confirm the hand. It is a draft of the instrument his solicitor is even now engrossing for your wedding day." Rosamond took the paper. It was warm from the old woman's hand and dry as a leaf, and it crackled as she unfolded it. And the cool, dim air seemed to press closer as she bent to the black, upright hand she had already learned to know. She read it once. She read it again, because the first time the words would not go in. It was a settlement, right enough, but not upon her. It was a deed of entail, drawn to take effect upon the marriage of Julian Alexander Vane, and the birth of a son of that marriage, and by it the whole of the great unentailed Vane fortune, the coal lands and the funds and the northern estates that no entail bound, the fortune that was Anthony's whole expectation, and his mother's 40,000 grown across 20 years into 100, the whole of it passed, upon the birth of that son, away from Anthony Vane, and to the child not yet conceived, of the girl now reading it in a stranger's morning room in the heat of a summer forenoon. The cool room tilted, very slightly, and steadied. "You see it now," the dowager said, not unkindly, watching her face. "He does not want a wife, child, he wants a second son, and a young mother of good blood and no fortune to bear one. One who will owe him everything and cost him nothing, and never think to ask why the elder boy is being quietly turned out of his own inheritance. Sybil says the son and father are estranged past mending, and that Julian means to be revenged on the boy for taking his mother's side. And I confess, though I have no love for Sybil, I have seen the instrument now with my own eyes, and the instrument does not lie, whatever the woman who sent it me may do." She sat back, the stick between her hands. "I do not cut the marriage to spite you. I cut it because a man who would do that to his own firstborn, in cold blood, over a lawyer's parchment, is a man no girl of 24 should be given to unwarned. That is my whole reason. Now you have it, and it is uglier than the drawing-room version, and I am sorry for it. But you asked me for the truth, and I am too old to have kept any other kind about the house." Rosamond sat very still with the paper in her 2 hands and the black hand of the man she had begun, God help her, to want, laid out plain before her, deeding away his own son's future to a child that did not exist, to be got upon her body like a clause in a contract. "He asks no settlement. None, do you hear me? I will not touch what you do not offer. I have found it a rarer thing than you would suppose, and I am too old now to want the other kind." Every word of it turned, now, in this cold light, to a different color. "You may keep the paper," the dowager said. "I have another. And you may do with it what you like. Weep on it, burn it, carry it to him, and watch him explain it away. For he will explain it, they always do. But you will not unknow it now. That was the unkindness. I am sorry for it, and I would do it again." She lifted the stick and rapped the floor, and somewhere a footman stirred. "Go home, child, go home to your mother, and think, and do not marry a man who deeds away his own blood before he has so much as taken your hand. There is a season's worth of kinder fools in London who would have you tomorrow, coronet or no. Good day." Rosamond went home. She did not weep in the chair. Though the streets swam by hot and bright and unreal beyond the glass, she sat with the paper folded small in her glove and her spine straight and her sums, her cold, clear, terrible sums, running and running behind her eyes. She did not go to the library. She went, instead, that same evening, in the last long gold of the summer day, to Ravensmere House, sent no word, gave the door no time to close against her, and went up the great cool stair past 41 dusted vanes, and one that was not dusted, past the 14th from the bottom, with its clean dark frame and its old grey lavender on the sill, and did not stop for it, though it stopped her heart to pass it, and found Julian in the library, with a lamp not yet lit, and the last light failing across the papers on his desk. He rose when he saw her face. He knew, at once, she watched him know it, watched the ease go out of him standing up, the way it had gone in her mother's garden, all in a moment, tied out, cold, flat sand. "You went to my aunt," he said. "I went to your aunt." She crossed the room and laid the folded paper on the desk between them, on the dark leather, exactly as Lady Sybil had laid down her cards, exactly as he had set down his untouched glass, and stepped back from it. "Read it, Your Grace. It is in your own hand. But then you will know it better than I." He did not touch it. He looked at it lying there in the last light, and then he looked at her, and his weathered face had gone very still, the stillness she had learned already to fear worse than any noise. Where did she get this? That is your first question? Her voice came out of her flat and cold and steady, and she was glad of it, glad of the year of bailiffs that had taught her to keep it so while everything under it broke. Not, it is a forgery. Not, it is not what it seems. But where did she get it? So it is true then. It is real. You have drawn an instrument to take the whole of the unentailed fortune from your son, and give it to a child you mean to get on me. And you sat in my mother's garden 2 days ago, and held my hand and told me you wanted nothing, that you would not touch what I did not offer, that you were too old to want the wrong kind of looking. She heard her own voice climb, and hauled it down. You wanted a womb of good blood and no price, Julian. You wanted a broodmare who would owe you her sister's seasons, and never think to read the parchment. And I very nearly, she stopped. She would not give him that. Tell me I have read it wrong. Look at me and tell me plainly that I have read it wrong, and I will believe you, God forgive me, because I have been 3 days wanting to believe you against every sum I know how to make. You have read it, Julian said, low, wrong, and I cannot tell you how. Not tonight, not this. Cannot, or will not. Both. The word came out of him like something torn. It is bound up in the thing I told you I could not tell you, the thing that is not mine alone, and I swear to you, Rosamond, on the one grave I honor in this world, that paper is not what my aunt has made you believe it is, and I cannot prove it to you without breaking a silence that will cost my son more than you can know. So you must. His hand lifted toward her, and fell. You must trust me, which I am aware is the whole of what no one in your life has ever earned the right to ask you, and which I have known you a fortnight, and which is worth exactly nothing laid against a document in my own hand. I know all that. I am asking it anyway. Trust me, and marry me, and let me tell you the rest when I am able. Or read the paper as my aunt read it to you, and go. The lamp was unlit. The last light went out of the high windows while they stood, and the great cold beautiful room filled slowly with dusk, and between them on the dark leather the folded paper lay where she had put it down, and neither of them touched it. Rosamond looked at the man twice her age, whom she did not love, and could not, 3 days ago, entirely dislike, and whom she now did not know at all, and understood that she had come, at last, to the very edge of the thing, the point past which there was no unpicking anything, that in 11 days she must stand up in St. George's before a family that meant to cut her, and be joined to him or refuse him, and that she must decide it here, now, in the dark, on the word of a stranger, against the hand of that same stranger, with a boy's whole future, and her sister's whole future, and her own hanging on which she chose to believe. You ask me to trust you, she said, very quietly, with nothing to trust you on but your asking. Yes, he did not soften it. That is exactly what I ask. It is monstrous. I know it is monstrous. She picked the paper up off the desk. She did not burn it, and she did not hand it back, and she did not weep. She folded it once more, smaller, and put it into her glove where her grandmother's thimble did not live, against her palm, and drew a long breath of the dry cool rose and beeswax dark. Then I will tell you what I mean to do, Your Grace, Rosamond said, and you will not like it any better than your aunt liked me. I will not take your word tonight, because a woman who takes a duke's word against a duke's own hand deserves what she gets, and I have got enough already, and I will not run home to my mother and cry off, because your aunt would like that far too well, and your sister-in-law better, and I find I would rather be ruined on my feet than saved on my knees. She lifted her chin. I am going to find out for myself what that paper is. Before the wedding, I am going to find the rosewood box, and the letters read only in part, and whatever silence it is you are all of you keeping in this cold house, and when I have it, when I have the truth in my own 2 hands, and not from your aunt's or your sister's or yours, then I will decide whether I stand up in that church, beside you, and not 1 hour before. She was at the door, her hand cold on the cold brass of the latch, before he spoke again, out of the dark behind her, in a voice she had not heard from him before, and would spend a long time trying to forget. Rosamond. Just that. And then, when she paused, but did not turn, if you pull that thread, she will know it. She will know within the day, and she does not. My son told you rightly. Lose gracefully. A silence, and the dusk, and the unlit lamp. Whatever you find, do not let her find you finding it. Not alone. Promise me that much, at least, and I will trouble you for nothing else. And Rosamond stood with her hand on the latch and the folded paper against her palm, and the whole altered ruin of the things settling round her in the dark, and gave him no promise, because she had run out of promises she could keep, and went out, past the 14th portrait from the bottom with its old grey lavender, down into the hot, bright falling night, alone, toward the one door in London she had sworn to herself she would open before she let them make her a duchess. She did not go home to sleep. She went home to write, and the letter she sent before the square had cooled cost her 3 drafts and half a candle, and it said, in the end, only this: the box, missed, vain, you know where she keeps it. Your aunt dines at Berkeley Square tomorrow. I had it from your grandmother's own footman. Meet me on the great stair at 8, and bring a light. We will read the whole of them together, or we will neither of us sleep again. He was there at 8, before her, a branch of candles guttering in his fist, and his young face scoured white in the wavering light. The great house lay dark and vast and breathing around them, the portraits swallowed in shadow, and only the 14th from the bottom caught the flame as she came up, the fair woman in grey, the book in her lap, the clean dark frame, the old grey lavender crumbling on the sill. She has gone to Coombe House, Anthony whispered. She took the violet carriage. We have perhaps 2 hours. His hand shook, and the wax ran hot over his knuckles, and he did not seem to feel it. The box is in her dressing room. I have never once opened it. In 21 years I have never once dared. Then you were a dutiful nephew, Rosamond said, and it is time you were a bad one. Light the way. The dressing room smelled of iris and cold smoke, of the woman herself, so that Rosamond's throat closed on it. The rosewood box sat on the dressing table between the silver brushes, small and dark and locked, and Anthony stared at it as though it might rise and speak. I have no key. You have a paper knife on that stand, and a duke's blood in your hands. Give it here. She worked the thin blade under the brass tongue, felt it grind, felt it give, the small sharp crack of it loud as a shot in the still hot room, and lifted the lid. Letters, a drift of them, cream-gone ivory with age, folded in a hand she did not know, and Anthony did, for he made a sound low in his chest and put out one finger and did not quite touch them. Her hand, he said. That is my mother's hand. Rosamond lifted the topmost and unfolded it to the light, and read, and felt the floor of the world shift under her a second time in 2 days, but the other way. Now, upward, terribly, into air. Read it aloud, Anthony said. I cannot. My eyes will not. Read it, please. She read it aloud. She read the whole of it, past the first cold grief Sybil had fed him in his boyhood. I am so much alone here. The house is so cold. Read on into the part that had been folded away, always for 11 years. But when Julian is home, the cold goes out of it entirely, and I am ashamed of my own low spirits. For he is the kindest man alive, and it is only his sister who makes a prison of his kindness. Sybil reads my letters before they go, and after they come. I must give this to the gardener's boy, or it will never leave the house. She read the next, and the next. She read a woman not fading of neglect, but walled alive by a sister-in-law, who intercepted every warmth that tried to reach her, who told the husband his wife wished solitude, and the wife her husband wished her gone, and stood, always, silken, in every doorway between them. She kept them apart, Anthony said. His voice had gone to a thread. My mother, and my father. She stood in the door and she kept them apart. And then she told me for 11 years that he put the back of his hand to his mouth. The candles shook. The last one. Read the last one. The last was short, and the ink of it faint, written near the end of the long illness that had at last taken Eleanor Vane from that cold, bright house 11 summers gone. If you find these, my Anthony, for I mean you to, one day, when your aunt no longer rules the reading of things, know that your father loved me past any words he was ever able to say to my face, for she was always at the door. Do not let her keep the two of you as she kept the two of us. That is the whole of what I have to leave you. Love him. He does not know how to ask for it. He never learned. Anthony Vane sat down slowly on the little gilt chair before his aunt's dressing table, in the smell of iris and cold smoke, and bent his dark head over his knees, and wept, as Rosamond had never yet seen a grown man weep, not for grief now, but for 11 years of the wrong grief, torn up by the roots at last. She let him. She had learned across a year of bailiffs that there is a weeping that must not be interrupted, only sat beside. She sat beside it, one hand light between his shaking shoulders, and while she sat she drew from her own glove the folded deed the dowager had given her, and by the guttering light she read it again, the whole of it, this time slow, past the page the old woman's finger had pressed upon, down into the close-written final clause that no one at Coombe House had troubled to read her. And there it was, folded away, exactly as the letters had been folded away. A part read aloud, and the rest kept dark. Miss Vane. Her voice had changed, and he heard it, and lifted his ruined face. Anthony, light me the last of this. I have been 3 days believing your father a monster on the strength of the first page of a lawyer's parchment, and I have just, God help my arithmetic, read the last page. She turned the deed to the flame so he could see. The fortune does not go to a child not yet born. That is only how it begins, and how your aunt read it to your grandmother, and how your grandmother read it to me. But listen to how it ends. She read it out into the hot, dark room, the black, upright hand she had learned by heart from a note kept in a workbox, to the intent and sole purpose that the trust heretofore reposed in my sister-in-law Sybil, Lady Marchbank, over the estate and moneys of my son Anthony Vane, be thereby wholly dissolved and determined, the said fortune to be resettled, entire and unencumbered, upon my son Anthony and the heirs of his body, this instrument being the only lawful means remaining to me to remove from my son's inheritance the hand that has these 11 years administered it. The silence after was enormous. He was not disinheriting you, Rosamond said. He was prizing your aunt's fingers off your money. She has been trustee of your mother's 40,000 since you were 10 years old, Anthony. That is the power he told me he gave into her keeping in his grief, and could not take back without a cost to you. The cost was this, that to free your fortune he must first make you learn what she is. He would not pay it. He let her call him a monster to his own son, rather than break your heart with her. And she, Rosamond, folded the deed shut. She found the draft, and read you the one page, and sent the same page to the dowager, and set out to stop the marriage, because a marriage means a son, and a son means Chancery must examine the whole estate, and an examination means her accounts. Her accounts, Anthony said slowly. Where do you suppose the violet carriages come from, and the iris sent from Grass, and 11 years of keeping a duke's house on a companion's portion? Rosamond rose. I think, Mr. Vane, if we look under those letters, we shall find she has kept more in this box than your mother's love. Women who are certain of their safety grow careless. Bring the light close. They found it beneath the last of the letters, a slim ledger in Sybil's own fine hand, and the figures in it, when Anthony held the candle to them, were the figures of 11 years of a young man's inheritance spent quietly away into violet silk and cold smoke. And it was at that moment, with the ledger open between them and the deed in Rosamond's hand, and the box gaping its whole broken truth to the light, that the dressing room door opened without a sound, and the smell of iris came in first, before the woman did. "How industrious," said Lady Sybil Marchbank. She stood in the doorway in her travelling cloak, the violet gone black in the candlelight, and her beautiful cold face was quite still, and only her eyes moved. From the broken box, to the letters, to the ledger under her nephew's hand, to Rosamond standing with the deed folded open. And Rosamond watched the swift and terrible arithmetic run behind them, and watched the exact instant the sum came out wrong for the first time in 11 years. "The carriage turned back," Sybil said, unhurried, drawing off one glove finger by finger, the old gesture, the deadly one. "Your grandmother, Anthony, took a chill and would not receive. How fortunate. I should have hated to miss this." Her pale eyes settled on Rosamond. "I did warn you, Miss Aldecott. Some houses keep their shape only because no one pulls the thread. You have pulled it in my own dressing room, over my own box, and now I suppose you imagine the house comes down. It does not. It never does. I have only to say that a bankrupt's daughter and a resentful boy broke a lock and forged a ledger to blacken an aunt who crossed them. And which of the two tales do you fancy the tongue will swallow?" "Neither," said a voice from the dark of the stair, "for I shall be telling the third." Julian came into the light. He had been at the Berkeley Square door, he would say afterward, come to make one last appeal to his aunt of Coombe, and had heard from her own lips that the Aldecott girl had called and gone away with a paper, and had come home at the gallop knowing exactly, at last, that the silence he had kept 11 years to spare his son had cost him everything it was meant to save. He stood now in his sister-in-law's doorway, grey and weathered and terrible, and he did not raise his voice, and Rosamond understood again that he had perhaps never in his life needed to. "Sybil," he said it almost gently, "it is finished. Put on your glove. Julian, you will draw it on, and you will go down to the small library, and you will sign the relinquishment of the trust that my solicitor has kept engrossed and waiting these 3 weeks against exactly this hour." He came forward into the candlelight, and the flame found the grey at his temples, and the old grief cut deep at his mouth. And he looked at the broken box, and at his mother's letters spread to the air, and last of all at his son. "You read her letters," he said to Anthony, and his voice, for the first time since Rosamond had known him, was not steady at all. The whole of them, sir." Anthony stood. He was 21, and his face was wrecked and open. "She said, my mother wrote, that you loved her past any words. That Aunt Sybil was always at the door." His jaw shook. "You let me believe it. All these years. You let me think you, rather than tell me what she was, you let me think the worst of you. You had lost your mother." Julian's hand lifted and fell, that gesture Rosamond knew. "I could not take your aunt from you as well and leave you nothing. I judged it kinder, that you should hate a man who could bear it than a woman you still needed. I was wrong. I have been 11 years wrong. I am so very sorry, Anthony." And Anthony Vane crossed the room and put his arms around his father, hard, the way a much younger boy would, and the Duke of Ravensmere stood in his dead wife's sister's dressing room, with his son's face against his shoulder, and shut his eyes, and one long breath went out of him, that had, Rosamond thought, been held for 11 summers. Lady Sybil watched them, and for one moment, Rosamond saw it, and would remember it. The beautiful cold face broke, not into fear now, but into something far older and worse. The naked look of a woman seeing at last the thing she had spent 11 years making certain she would never have to see. The two of them, warm, together, and no doorway left for her to stand in. "I kept this house," she said, and her voice had gone thin. "I raised him. You were of no use to anyone that first year, Julian. You were a ruin, and I kept the whole of it turning while you—" "You did," Julian said, over his son's dark head. "And I have thanked you for it every quarter day for 11 years, in a coin you turned into iris and silk. It is done. Sybil, sign, and keep what you have spent, and I shall not send the ledger to Chancery for the boy's sake and my mother's name. Refuse, and I shall." He lifted his head. "That is the whole of the mercy left in me tonight. Do not spend an hour deciding. I have not the patience for it, and neither, I find, has my future wife." Sybil Marchbank drew on her glove. She looked at the box and the letters and did not gather them. There was nothing left in them for her now. She crossed to the small writing table by the window and took a sheet and dipped the pen. And there, in the hot candlelight, with all three of them watching, she wrote out in her own fine hand her surrender of the trust, and dried it, and folded it once, and laid it on the corner of the table nearest Rosamond, not near Julian, near Rosamond, with a small precise contempt that was the last of her, and stepped back. Rosamond picked it up. She unfolded it and read the one line aloud. Because she had learned that the truth must be said in the room where it happens, or it does not count, I, Sybil, Lady Marchbank, do wholly and without reservation relinquish the trust of the estate of Anthony Vane, from this day. There, said Sybil. You have your thread, and your house, and your boy, and your duke. I hope, Miss Aldecott, that you enjoy the arithmetic of them at 24, for it is longer than you think, a marriage, and colder than you know. She drew her cloak close, and the iris moved with her, and at the door she paused, and did not turn, and said in a voice gone almost human, he did love her. That was always the unbearable part. Not that he could not. That he could, and never once at me. And then she was gone, down into the dark of the great stair, and the front door closed far below, and the house let out a breath, and the candles steadied, and it was over. They did not speak for a moment. Then Anthony bent and gathered his mother's letters one by one back into the broken box, tender as a man handling the last frail leaves of something, and closed the lid on them and held it against his chest. I should like, he said, unsteadily, to hang her portrait somewhere warmer than the stair, somewhere with a fire. If I may, sir, you may hang it, said Julian. Wherever in England you please. It is your house as much as mine. It always was. I only forgot to say so. He put his hand to the back of his son's neck, once, the way one gentles a horse, and Anthony bore it, and something 11 years broken knit quietly together, in the smell of hot wax, and old iris, and older love. Then the boy looked at Rosamond over the box, and made her a bow, a true one, deep, nothing insolent left in it anywhere. You said you observed instead of weeping, he said. I think tonight you did both, and I am glad of it, and I hope you will let me call you sister, for I find I should like one very much, and I have had quite enough of aunts. You may call me Rosamond, she said, and her own voice was not steady, which is what my family calls me, and what you are now, God and the Archbishop willing, about to be. And she watched him carry his mother out of that cold room toward a fire, and was left alone in the guttering light with the man twice her age whom she had, 3 days since, believed a monster, and now did not. Julian looked at her across the little wreck of the dressing table. He did not come to her. He stood, grey and weathered, and suddenly, wholly unguarded. The coronet gone out of him entirely, only a tired man in a hot summer night who had been given back his son. You went to my aunt when I begged you not to, he said. You broke into my sister-in-law's rooms. You forced a lock with a paper knife. You have overturned in one night a silence I gave 11 years of my life to keep. The bracket moved at his mouth, that quick dark flicker, but slower now, and it stayed. I asked you to trust me on nothing but my asking, and you refused me flat, and went and found the truth in your own 2 hands, exactly as you said you would. I have never in my life been so thoroughly disobeyed, nor so grateful for it. I begin to think, Rosamond, that I did not ask you to marry me for the reason I gave you at all. No? Her heart had begun the blackbirds beating again. What reason then, Your Grace? I told you it was because you looked at me across a ballroom as though I were a man and not a coronet. He came to her now, 1 step, 2, until she could see the pulse at his throat and smell the road dust and the summer heat on him. That was true, and it was not the whole of it. And I have known it was not the whole of it since you told me, half an hour into my own drawing room, exactly which portrait on my stair I stop at every night of my life. I did not marry you to be seen, Rosamond. Any looking glass will see a man. I asked you because you looked, and then you told me the truth of what you saw. And no living soul has done both those things to me in 11 years, and I found, God help me, at 45, over a bankrupt's debt, that I could not go on another season without it. He took her hand, and did not correct himself, and did not let it go. I love you. I am aware of the arithmetic. I love you regardless of it, and I have no intention whatever of getting a son off you like a clause. And if you want the whole of the unentailed fortune settled on the parish poor tomorrow to prove it, you have only to say, for I find I would give the last of it gladly to see you look at me once more the way you did across that carpet, when you told me I had bought you, and dared me to be a lesser man than I hoped I was. Rosamond Aldecott stood in the ruin of her enemy's dressing room, with her hand in the hand of a duke twice her age, and did the sum at last, the cold, clear, terrible sum she had been running behind her eyes for a fortnight, and found, for the first time, that it came out warm. I told you once, she said, that the danger was never the man twice my age who did not love me. Her voice caught, and she let it. The danger was how much I wanted him to. I have been 3 days believing I had been a fool for it, Julian. It appears I was only early. She lifted his hand and pressed it, briefly, hard, to her own cheek, warm skin to warm skin in the hot dark. I love you. I did not mean to. I am not sorry. Now take me down to a fire and a glass of something, for I have forced 1 lock tonight and outfaced 2 duchesses, and I find even I have a limit, and I should like to reach it sitting down, beside you, where I mean to spend the remainder of a very long and disobedient life. He kissed her, then, once, and carefully, and entirely correct, and then, not correct at all, and the summer night held them, and far off through the open window a night bird sang in the park, and neither of them, for a long while, said anything more at all. The Dowager Duchess of Coombe came to the wedding. She came because Rosamond went to her the next morning, in her plainest walking dress again, and laid the whole deed and the whole ledger and one of Eleanor Vane's letters on the cold hearth between them, and said only, "You read me a part, Your Grace," and folded away the rest, exactly as Lady Sybil taught you to. I do not blame you for it, but you told me you did what you did for the name, and the name, I think, would rather you knew the whole. And the old woman read it, all of it, in the dim rose-leaf cool, and set it down, and looked at the girl a long time with the ancient clever Vane eyes. "You came into my house, and let me be unkind to you," she said at last, and went away, and came back to hand me the truth, as though I had not just tried to ruin you with the half of it. "Why?" "Because you were the one door in London that could unruin me," Rosamond said, "and because I did not think you a cruel woman, only an old, and lied to one. I have some acquaintance now with what that costs." The stick tapped once against the floor. Something that in a younger face would have been a smile disturbed the old one. "Impertinent," said the Dowager Duchess of Coombe. "Well-bred people do not hand a duchess her own errors before noon. She rapped for her woman. Fetch my card case, and the good writing paper, and tell them to put the Greys to at 11. I am going to St. George's on Thursday se'nnight, and I am going in the front, where the whole of this family can see me do it, and God help the Dowager who arrives after me." So the family followed, as families do, and the church was full. They were married at St. George's in the last week of July, in the long-coloured light through the south windows, and Rosamond wore not amber, but a gown of deep summer green, like the heart of the box hedge, and Anthony Vane stood up at his father's side to hand the ring, and the Dowager sat in the front pew, with her ebony stick planted before her like a standard, and where Lady Sybil Marchbank had gone, to Bath it was said, on her spent money, to a set of rooms and a diminished acquaintance, no one very much troubled to ask. And some months on, when the summer had turned and the first cool mornings came in over the park and the plane trees along the railings began to gild, the new Duchess of Ravensmere stood on the great stair of a house that was no longer cold, before the 14th portrait from the bottom, which was not on the stair any longer at all, but hung now in the warm morning room over the fire Anthony had chosen for it. The fair woman in grey with her book and her son's exact eyes. A fresh sprig of lavender, always on the mantel beneath, because Rosamond saw to it, and Anthony saw to it, and once, she had found, Julian still stopped there in the early dark. Though now, he did not do it alone. She stood at the tall window of that warm room, with her husband beside her, his hand warm and hard and entirely correct at the small of her back, and then, when the servants had gone, not correct at all. And out in the little formal garden where the last roses were blowing, and the box gave up its sharp green scent to the cooling air, a blackbird, some London blackbird, bold as brass, the same or another, it did not matter which, sang from the top of the yew as though nothing in the house had ever been anything but glad. "You are counting something," Julian said against her hair. "I can always tell. You go very still, and your eyes move, and then some poor soul learns the truth about himself over the soup." "I am counting the roses," Rosamond said, "and the mornings you have laughed since June, which is a far larger number than the arithmetic allowed for. And I am thinking that I was told, once, in this family's coldest voice, that a marriage is longer than I thought, and colder than I knew." She turned in the circle of his arm and looked up at the grave, weathered, wholly changed face of the man twice her age, whom she had married for a debt and kept for love. She was right about the first. I have found no end of it, and I hope I never do. She was wrong about the second. Was she? The bracket moved at his mouth, and this time it opened all the way, into the smile that 11 years had forgotten, and one impertinent girl had taught it back. "Tell me the sum then, Duchess. You have the look of a woman with a total." "The sum," said Rosamond, and laid her warm hand flat against his chest, over the steady beat of it, in the gold September light with the blackbird singing, and the lavender fresh on the mantel, and the whole warm house turning quietly around them, "is that I was forced to wed a duke twice my age, and I found the love I never knew existed, and I would not trade 1 hour of the whole disobedient business. Not the debt, not the door, not the broken lock, for any softer story in England. There, that is the total. It does not come out cold at all." And the blackbird sang, and he kissed her, and the last of the summer roses let go their petals to the cooling air outside the open window, one by one, warm and unhurried, in the good light.